What I'm about to tell you sounds like something out of a movie, but every single detail is absolutely true. This is the story of Michael Chen, a brilliant software engineer who worked for 7 years at TechFlow Industries, building their entire digital infrastructure from the ground up. His boss, David Richardson, thought he could humiliate Michael, steal his ideas, and then throw him away like garbage. But David made one fatal mistake. He had no idea that Michael wasn't just an employee. He was the architect of everything that made their company valuable. And when David fired him in the most humiliating way possible, Michael didn't get mad. He got even. And his revenge was so perfectly calculated that it didn't just destroy David's career, it brought down the entire 10 million company. By the end of this story, you'll understand why you should never, ever underestimate the quiet person in the office who actually knows how everything works. This is a masterclass in patience, planning, and the sweet taste of justice served ice cold. Let me paint you a picture of Michael Chen, 34 years old, MIT graduate, and the kind of software engineer who could code circles around anyone in Silicon Valley. But Michael wasn't your typical tech bro. He was quiet, methodical, and had this almost supernatural ability to see problems before they happened. 7 years ago, Michael joined TechFlow Industries when it was just a startup with 12 employees working out of a converted warehouse. The company provided custom software solutions for small businesses, but they were struggling to scale. Their systems were held together with digital duct tape, and they were bleeding money on inefficient processes. Enter Michael Chen. Within his first year, Michael had completely revolutionized their entire operation. He built custom automation systems that reduced their processing time by 400%. He created proprietary algorithms that could analyze business data in ways their competitors couldn't even dream of. He designed security protocols that were so advanced that Fortune 500 companies started headhunting TechFlow just to get access to Michael's systems. But here's the thing, Michael was terrible at office politics. While he was busy building the technical foundation that would make TechFlow millions, he wasn't playing the corporate game. He didn't smooze at company parties. He didn't golf with the executives. He just did exceptional work and assumed that would be enough. And that's where David Richardson comes into our story. David was everything Michael wasn't: charismatic, connected, and absolutely ruthless when it came to climbing the corporate ladder. David joined TechFlow as a sales manager 3 years after Michael, but he had something Michael didn't: the ability to take credit for other people's work and make it sound like his own genius. Over the next 4 years, David systematically positioned himself as the visionary behind TechFlow's success. In meetings with investors, David would present Michael's innovations as his own strategic initiatives. When clients praised their revolutionary systems, David made sure he was the one shaking hands and taking bows. Meanwhile, Michael was being kept in the background, labeled as just the technical guy who implements David's brilliant ideas. The company grew from 12 employees to over 200. Their annual revenue jumped from 300,000 to the 10 million. They moved into a beautiful corporate headquarters with David's name on a corner office door that read Chief Innovation Officer. And Michael was still sitting in the same cubicle he'd occupied for 7 years with the same job title, Senior Software Developer. The first major red flag came during TechFlow's 5th anniversary celebration. The entire company gathered in their main conference room, and CEO Patricia Williams stood up to give a speech about their incredible growth. Ladies and gentlemen, Patricia announced, our success story wouldn't be possible without visionary leadership. I want to recognize David Richardson, whose innovative thinking and strategic planning has transformed us from a small startup into an industry leader. Michael sat in the back, watching as David stood up to thunderous applause. David smiled that politicians smile and began his acceptance speech. Thank you, Patricia. When I first joined TechFlow, I saw tremendous potential, but I also saw that we needed revolutionary systems to unlock that potential. So I designed and implemented comprehensive automation protocols, advanced data analytics platforms, and enterprise-level security infrastructures that have become the backbone of our success. Every single thing David mentioned was something Michael had built. Every system, every innovation, every breakthrough, it was all Michael's work being claimed by someone else. But that wasn't even the worst part. David continued, and I'm excited to announce that next month, I'll be presenting our proprietary technology solutions at the National Software Innovation Conference, where I'll be sharing the methodologies I developed that have made TechFlow an industry pioneer. Michael felt his blood run cold. The National Software Innovation Conference was the Super Bowl of their industry. It was where careers were made and million-dollar partnerships were born. And David was going to present 7 years of Michael's life work as his own achievement. After the celebration, Michael approached David privately. David, I think there might be some confusion about the conference presentation. Those systems you mentioned, I designed and built all of those. I have all the documentation, code repositories, and development logs to prove it. And David looked at Michael with this condescending smile and said, Mike, buddy, you're a great coder, but you don't understand how business works. Ideas are worthless without execution strategy and market positioning. You might have written some code, but I'm the one who had the vision to see how it could transform our entire industry. That's the difference between a developer and a leader. Michael tried to stay calm. David, I literally have emails from you asking me to explain how these systems work because you couldn't understand them yourself. I have meeting recordings where you admitted you didn't know the technical details. This isn't just unethical, it could be considered intellectual property theft. And that's when David's mask completely slipped. Listen to me very carefully, Michael. You're replaceable, your code. We have backups, your systems. We have documentation. But what we don't need is a disgruntled employee who doesn't understand his place in this organization. I suggest you remember who signs your paychecks and who is Patricia's ear when it comes to personnel decisions. It was a threat, clear and simple, but Michael wasn't backing down. The next day, he scheduled a meeting with Patricia Williams, the CEO, to set the record straight. He prepared a comprehensive presentation showing the development timeline of every major system, including his original design documents, code commits with timestamps, and email trails proving his authorship of every innovation David was claiming credit for. Michael walked into Patricia's office confident that once she saw the evidence, justice would prevail. He was about to learn a harsh lesson about corporate loyalty. Patricia Williams listened to Michael's presentation for exactly 12 minutes before cutting him off. Michael, I'm going to stop you right there. David already spoke with me about this conversation you two had yesterday. He's concerned that you're experiencing some sort of workplace stress that's affecting your judgment and memory of how our projects developed. Michael, couldn't believe what he was hearing. Patricia, with all due respect, I have documented proof of everything I'm telling you. These timestamps don't lie. The code repositories show clearly who wrote what and when. Patricia sighed like she was dealing with a difficult child. Michael, David has been instrumental in securing our biggest clients. He's the face of our innovation department. Our investors specifically requested that he represent our technology at the conference because they trust his vision and leadership. But it's not his technology, Michael insisted. It's mine, every algorithm, every system architecture, every security protocol. I can prove I created all of it. And David has acknowledged your contributions as a developer, Patricia replied coldly. But there's a difference between writing code and creating transformative business solutions. David took your technical work and turned it into something that could revolutionize entire industries. That's leadership, Michael. That's innovation. Michael realized that Patricia wasn't interested in the truth. She was interested in maintaining the narrative that had brought in millions of dollars in investment funding. So what you're telling me, Michael said slowly, is that even with documented proof that I created these systems, you're going to let David present them as his own work at the most important conference in our industry. Patricia's expression hardened. What I'm telling you, Michael, is that questioning David's integrity and trying to undermine his leadership role suggests that you might not be the right cultural fit for TechFlow's future direction. It was another threat, but this one came from the very top. Michael left that meeting understanding that the company he had helped build from nothing had no loyalty to him whatsoever. But he decided to try one more approach. Over the next 2 weeks, Michael meticulously compiled an irrefutable case. He gathered every piece of evidence, development logs, email communications, design documents, even security camera footage from the server room showing him working alone on weekends and holidays to build the systems David was claiming credit for. He also discovered something interesting while reviewing old financial documents for his evidence collection. As the original architect of their billing and client management systems, Michael still had administrative access to financial reports that most employees couldn't see. And what he found made everything much more serious than simple credit theft. David hadn't just been stealing recognition for Michael's work. He had been actively sabotaging Michael's career while positioning himself for a massive promotion that would come with equity shares worth over $2 million. But Michael decided to give the company one final chance to do the right thing. He requested a meeting with the entire executive team, including Patricia Williams, David Richardson, and the 3 other department heads. He announced that he had critical information about the development of their core systems that needed to be addressed before the upcoming conference presentation. The meeting was scheduled for Friday, November 15th at 10 a.m. in the main conference room. Michael had no idea that David had already decided to end his employment at TechFlow permanently. Michael walked into that conference room carrying 7 years of documented proof that he was the true creator of TechFlow's most valuable assets. He had organized his evidence into a clear, undeniable presentation that would expose David's lies and restore his rightful recognition. But the moment he entered the room, he knew something was wrong. Instead of the executive team he was expecting, there was only David Richardson, Patricia Williams, and Janet Morrison from Human Resources. And their expressions weren't curious or concerned, they were hostile. Michael, Patricia began without any preamble. We've called this meeting to discuss some serious concerns about your recent behavior and performance. Michael was confused. I thought we were here to review the technical development documentation I prepared. This is about ensuring accuracy for the conference presentation. David leaned forward with that same condescending smile. Michael, your obsession with taking credit for team achievements has become disruptive to our workplace environment. Multiple employees have complained about your increasingly erratic behavior and your attempts to undermine established leadership. That's completely false, Michael replied, setting down his presentation materials. I haven't spoken to any other employees about this. And I'm not trying to take credit for team achievements, I'm trying to correct the record about individual contributions to specific technical systems. Janet Morrison opened a folder and began reading from it. Michael, we have reports that you've been accessing company systems outside of your authorized scope, making unauthorized copies of proprietary code, and attempting to build a case against your supervisor based on conspiracy theories about credit and recognition. Michael felt the room spinning. Everything they were saying was technically true, but completely misrepresented. Yes, he had accessed systems he had built to gather evidence. Yes, he had copied code he had written to prove his authorship. But it wasn't corporate espionage, it was self-defense. These systems I accessed, I built them. The code I copied, I wrote it. The documentation I compiled, it's proof of my own work. How is that unauthorized when it's literally my intellectual property? Patricia stood up. Michael, your intellectual property belongs to TechFlow Industries under the terms of your employment contract. Your attempt to gather and compile this information without authorization constitutes a serious breach of company policy and potentially criminal theft of trade secrets. The words hit Michael like a physical blow. They were turning his attempt to prove his authorship into evidence of corporate theft. David added, "We also have concerns about your mental state, Michael. This paranoid thinking, these accusations against colleagues, this inability to accept your role within the team structure. It suggests you might be experiencing some kind of breakdown. You're gaslighting me," Michael said quietly. "You're trying to make me think I'm crazy for having accurate memories of my own work." And statements like that, Janet interjected, demonstrate exactly why we believe you might be a danger to yourself and your coworkers. Patricia delivered the final blow at Michael Chen, effective immediately. Your employment with TechFlow Industries is terminated. Security will escort you from the building. You have 15 minutes to collect personal items from your workspace under supervision. Any attempt to access company systems, contact company employees, or remove company property will result in criminal prosecution. Michael sat there in stunned silence for several seconds. 7 years of his life. 7 years of 60-hour weeks, weekend coding sessions, and revolutionary innovations that had transformed a failing startup into a 10 million success story. And they were throwing him out like garbage while the man who had stolen his life's work sat there smiling. "You know what the most pathetic part is, Michael?" David said with genuine cruelty in his voice. "You actually thought your technical skills mattered more than business relationships. You thought being right was more important than being valuable. But here's the reality: I can replace your code, but you can't replace my connections. I can hire 10 programmers to maintain your systems, but you can't hire 10 CEOs to trust your vision." As security guards arrived to escort Michael from the building, David delivered his final insult. "Good luck explaining this termination to your next employer. Fired for attempting to steal trade secrets and making paranoid accusations against management. That's quite a career achievement, don't you think?" Michael gathered his few personal belongings and walked out of TechFlow Industries for the last time. But as he sat in his car in the parking lot, watching employees who had benefited from his innovations walk past without even acknowledging him, Michael Chen made a decision that would change everything. David Richardson had made one catastrophic error in his victory celebration. He had just declared war on the one person who understood exactly how fragile TechFlow's success really was. Most people, when they're humiliated and destroyed like Michael was, they get angry. They make emotional decisions. They lash out immediately and end up making things worse for themselves. But Michael Chen wasn't most people. Michael went home to his small apartment and did something that would prove to be David Richardson's worst nightmare. He started thinking like an engineer. See, engineers don't just solve problems. They reverse engineer problems. They break down complex systems to understand every component, every connection, every potential point of failure. And Michael realized that TechFlow Industries wasn't just a company that had fired him, it was a system. A very complex, very fragile system that he had designed most of. The first thing Michael did was take inventory of exactly what he knew and what he had access to. And what he discovered was remarkable. Remember, Michael had built TechFlow's infrastructure from the ground up over 7 years. That meant he knew every server configuration, every database structure, every security protocol, and every potential vulnerability in their entire digital ecosystem. But more importantly, he knew something that nobody else at TechFlow understood. Their entire operation was built on what engineers call technical debt. A technical debt is what happens when you build systems quickly and efficiently, but you cut corners on documentation, redundancy, and knowledge transfer because you're the only person who needs to understand how everything works. For 7 years, Michael had been TechFlow's entire technical brain trust. When something broke, they called Michael. When they needed upgrades, Michael designed them. When clients had complex requirements, Michael built custom solutions. But Michael had never fully documented how these systems worked, because why would he? He was going to be there forever, right? Wrong. Now, TechFlow had a 10 million company running on systems that only one person truly understood, and that person was no longer their employee. But that was just the beginning of what Michael discovered during his planning phase. Remember how I mentioned that Michael had found financial irregularities while gathering evidence? Well, during his 7 years as the architect of their billing and data management systems, Michael had built in comprehensive logging and audit trails for everything. And those logs told a very interesting story about David Richardson's rise to power. Michael spent 3 weeks after his termination doing forensic analysis of 7 years of company data. And what he found was a pattern of systematic fraud that made his own situation seem minor by comparison. David hadn't just stolen credit for Michael's work. He had been fabricating client testimonials, inflating project success metrics, and even billing clients for proprietary innovations that were actually open-source solutions Michael had implemented for free. But the most damaging discovery was what David had been doing with the company's intellectual property. Remember that National Software Innovation Conference where David was planning to present Michael's work as his own? Well, Michael discovered that David had already been shopping that technology to competitors, promising exclusive licensing deals worth millions of dollars. David Richardson wasn't just a credit thief. He was preparing to sell TechFlow's most valuable assets to their biggest competitors while positioning himself as the genius inventor who deserved the largest share of profits. But Michael also discovered something else during his analysis, something that would become the cornerstone of his revenge strategy. TechFlow's entire operation was completely dependent on a series of automated systems that Michael had built with what he called administrative backdoors. These weren't malicious backdoors, they were legitimate maintenance and troubleshooting tools that allowed him to diagnose problems and perform emergency repairs remotely. Every major software system has them, and they're completely legal and necessary. But there was one crucial detail that Michael had never mentioned to anyone at TechFlow: all of these backdoors to his personal digital certificates and authentication tokens. And when TechFlow terminated his employment, they had forgotten to revoke his administrative access to the very systems that kept their entire company running. Michael now had the ability to demonstrate exactly how valuable his contributions had been to TechFlow's success. But he was going to do it in a way that was completely legal, absolutely devastating, and perfectly timed for maximum impact. The National Software Innovation Conference was scheduled for January 15th, exactly 8 weeks after Michael's termination. That gave him just enough time to execute the most elegant revenge plan in corporate history. Michael's revenge strategy was masterful in its simplicity. He wasn't going to hack systems or destroy data or do anything illegal. Instead, he was going to let David Richardson destroy himself by exposing the truth at exactly the right moment. Phase 1 began immediately after Michael completed his analysis. Michael contacted Patricia Williams and David Richardson via certified mail, informing them that as the original architect of TechFlow's core systems, he was legally required to notify them of critical security vulnerabilities and system dependencies that needed to be addressed immediately after his departure. The letter was perfectly professional and completely truthful. Michael explained that their automated systems contained authentication dependencies tied to his personal credentials, and that these would need to be updated to prevent potential system failures. He offered to provide consulting services to facilitate this transition for a standard industry rate of $200 per hour, with an estimated 120 hours required to properly document and transfer all system knowledge. TechFlow's response was predictable. David Richardson sent back a dismissive email stating that their technical team had everything under control and that Michael's scare tactics wouldn't result in any consulting contracts. Patricia Williams didn't respond at all. Perfect. Phase 2 involved Michael's decision to attend the National Software Innovation Conference as an independent consultant. Since he was no longer employed by TechFlow, Michael was free to register for the conference and even book his own presentation slot. The conference organizers were thrilled to have the actual architect of the systems that everyone was talking about. Michael registered for a presentation titled A Case Study: 7 Years of Software Architecture Development, Lessons in System Design, Documentation, and Knowledge Transfer. He scheduled it for January 16th, exactly 1 day after David Richardson's presentation. Phase 3 was the most crucial element of Michael's plan. Starting in early December, Michael began reaching out to TechFlow's biggest clients, offering his services as an independent consultant specializing in the exact type of systems that TechFlow had built for them. Michael's pitch was simply: as the original architect of the technology solutions you're currently using, I can provide optimization services, security audits, and system enhancements that go far beyond standard maintenance contracts. The response was overwhelming. Client after client contacted TechFlow asking about Michael Chen and whether they could hire him directly for additional work on their systems. They wanted the actual creator of their technology working on their projects, not just the company that employed him. But here's where Michael's plan got truly brilliant. When TechFlow clients started asking about Michael, David Richardson made a fatal error. Instead of simply saying that Michael no longer worked there, David decided to protect his reputation by actively sabotaging Michael's credibility. David told clients that Michael Chen had been terminated for attempting to steal trade secrets, and that any work he performed on their systems would potentially compromise their security and violate their contracts with TechFlow. This was a mistake of epic proportions, because now David Richardson had committed defamation in writing to multiple witnesses while making false statements about the creator of the very systems he was claiming to have invented. But Michael didn't respond to these attacks. He just waited. January 15th arrived, and David Richardson took the stage at the National Software Innovation Conference to present revolutionary automation systems. How visionary leadership transforms technical innovation into industry solutions. For 45 minutes, David presented Michael's life work as his own achievement. He showed architecture diagrams that Michael had drawn, code samples that Michael had written, and case studies of implementations that Michael had personally designed and deployed. The audience was impressed. David received a standing ovation and multiple requests for follow-up consultations worth potentially millions of dollars. David Richardson walked off that stage thinking he had just secured his future as one of the most recognized innovators in the software industry. He had no idea that his entire world was about to collapse in the most public way possible. Because the next morning, Michael Chen took the same stage. January 16, 10 a.m. Michael Chen walked onto the stage of the National Software Innovation Conference carrying a simple laptop and a wireless presenter remote. The audience was curious. Many of them had attended David Richardson's presentation the day before and were wondering why there was a follow-up session on similar technology. Michael began with a single sentence that changed everything. Yesterday, you heard a presentation about revolutionary software systems. Today, you're going to meet the person who actually built them. The room went completely silent. For the next hour, Michael delivered the most devastating technical presentation in conference history. He started by displaying the original design documents for every system David had claimed to invent, complete with timestamps, revision histories, and his digital signatures on every file. Then he showed the development logs, proving that he had personally written over 95% of the code that powered TechFlow's most valuable innovations. But the real bombshell came when Michael displayed email threads between himself and David Richardson, showing David repeatedly asking Michael to explain how the systems worked because David couldn't understand them well enough to discuss them with clients. The audience was stunned. Several people began recording the presentation on their phones. But Michael wasn't finished. He revealed the financial analysis he had conducted, showing that David had been misrepresenting the capabilities and origins of TechFlow's technology to secure contracts worth over $3 million based on false claims. Then came the most damaging revelation of all. Michael displayed communications proving that David Richardson had been secretly negotiating with TechFlow's competitors to license the technology he claimed to have invented, potentially violating his fiduciary duty to his own company. But the absolute masterpiece of Michael's presentation was his live demonstration. "Ladies and gentlemen," Michael announced, "I'd like to show you what happens when a company terminates the employment of the person who built their entire technical infrastructure without properly transferring system knowledge." Michael opened his laptop and accessed TechFlow systems using his administrative credentials that they had forgotten to revoke. On the conference room's main screen, he displayed TechFlow's real-time system status dashboard, showing every server, every database, and every automated process that kept their 10 million company running. Then he began pointing out critical vulnerabilities and dependencies that only he knew about. "This authentication server," Michael explained, pointing to a red warning indicator, "has been running on my personal security certificates for 7 years. It's scheduled to expire in 2 weeks, and when it does, it will cascade failure through 17 dependent systems. This database cluster is configured with backup protocols that only I know how to restore. If any of these servers fail, TechFlow will lose 7 years of client data unless someone who understands my architecture specifications can perform emergency recovery. And this automated billing system processes over $800,000 in monthly client payments. But it's running on deprecated authentication tokens that are tied to my employee credentials. When those tokens expire next month, TechFlow won't be able to bill their clients until someone rebuilds the entire payment processing infrastructure." The audience was watching a real-time demonstration of corporate technical debt in action. But Michael wasn't sabotaging anything. He was simply showing how fragile TechFlow's success really was without the person who had built it. Then came the final blow. Michael displayed his professional portfolio, showing 7 years of software architecture work, innovation awards, and client testimonials, all documented and timestamped proof of his actual contributions to the industry. David Richardson claimed yesterday that leadership means taking technical work and turning it into transformative business solutions, Michael concluded. But real leadership means building systems that can survive the departure of any individual team member. It means documenting knowledge, training successors, and ensuring that innovation serves the organization, not just personal advancement. TechFlow Industries is about to discover the difference between actual technical expertise and borrowed credibility. And their clients deserve to know who really created the systems they're paying for. Michael closed his laptop and walked off the stage to thunderous applause. But the real fireworks were just beginning. Within hours, video clips of Michael's presentation were spreading across social media. For TechFlow Exposed began trending on Twitter. Industry blogs started picking up the story, and TechFlow's clients began making phone calls. The destruction of David Richardson and TechFlow Industries happened faster than anyone could have predicted. Within 48 hours of Michael's conference presentation, 3 of TechFlow's biggest clients had terminated their contracts, citing concerns about misrepresentation of technical capabilities and intellectual property ownership. The clients weren't just canceling their current agreements, they were demanding refunds for services they claimed had been provided under false pretenses. But the real catastrophe began when TechFlow's systems started failing exactly as Michael had predicted. Remember those authentication certificates that were tied to Michael's credentials? They began expiring right on schedule, causing cascade failures throughout TechFlow's entire digital infrastructure. Without Michael's expertise, TechFlow's remaining technical staff couldn't diagnose or repair the increasingly complex system failures. Client websites went offline, data became inaccessible, automated billing stopped working. Within 1 week, TechFlow was hemorrhaging money at a rate of over 50,000 per day in lost revenue and emergency consulting fees. Patricia Williams finally swallowed her pride and contacted Michael, offering him a consulting contract to help stabilize their systems. Michael's response was professional and devastating. "I appreciate the offer, but my current consulting rate for emergency system recovery is $500 per hour with a minimum 200-hour commitment payable in advance. Additionally, I require a written acknowledgement of my role in developing the systems I'll be repairing, and a public correction of any previous misstatements about my contributions to TechFlow's technology." Patricia Williams was in no position to negotiate. But even with Michael's help, the damage was irreversible. The story of TechFlow's collapse had become a cautionary tale throughout the software industry. Investors began withdrawing funding, potential clients chose competitors. Top employees started leaving for more stable companies. David Richardson was placed on administrative leave pending an internal investigation of his role in the crisis. That investigation revealed the full scope of David's misconduct. The financial audit that Michael's presentation had prompted uncovered systematic fraud in client billing, misrepresentation of company capabilities, and unauthorized negotiations with competitors. But the most damaging discovery was evidence that David had been planning to leave TechFlow and start his own company using technology he claimed to have invented, technology that actually belonged to TechFlow and had been created by Michael. David Richardson was terminated for cause, losing not only his job but also his equity stake in the company, which had been worth over $2 million before the collapse. But termination was just the beginning of David's problems. Several of TechFlow's former clients filed lawsuits alleging fraud and misrepresentation in their service agreements. The evidence from Michael's conference presentation made these cases extremely difficult for David to defend. Professional licensing boards in 3 states opened investigations into David's conduct based on complaints from industry colleagues who had attended the conference. And perhaps most devastatingly, David Richardson became unemployable in the software industry. The video of Michael's presentation had been viewed over 200,000 times, making David's misconduct known to virtually every major employer in their field. Meanwhile, TechFlow Industries never recovered from the systemic failures and client exodus that followed Michael's departure. The company that had once been valued at over $10 million was sold for parts to a competitor for less than $800,000. Patricia Williams lost her CEO position and most of her personal investment in the company. Over 150 employees lost their jobs when TechFlow finally closed its doors in April, just 4 months after firing Michael Chen. But this story has one more twist that makes Michael's revenge absolutely perfect. Remember how Michael had started reaching out to TechFlow's clients as an independent consultant? Well, those clients still needed the services that TechFlow had been providing. They still needed someone who understood the systems that ran their businesses. And there was only one person in the world who truly understood those systems: Michael Chen. Within 6 months of TechFlow's collapse, Michael had established his own consulting firm, Chen Systems Architecture. His first clients were the same companies that had previously been paying TechFlow millions of dollars for services based on Michael's innovations. But now they were paying Michael directly, cutting out the middleman who had added no value while taking most of the credit and profits. Michael's consulting firm grew rapidly as word spread about his expertise and integrity. Industry colleagues who had witnessed his conference presentation began referring their own clients to him. Within 2 years, Chen Systems Architecture had generated over $5 million in revenue, making Michael more successful as an independent consultant than he had ever been as a TechFlow employee. But the most satisfying part of Michael's success wasn't financial. At the next National Software Innovation Conference, Michael was invited as the keynote speaker. His presentation was titled "Building Sustainable Success: Why Technical Excellence and Ethical Leadership Are Inseparable." The speech received a standing ovation and established Michael as one of the most respected voices in the software industry. During the Q&A session, a young developer asked Michael, "What advice would you give to someone who feels like their contributions aren't being recognized at work?" Michael's answer became legendary in their industry: "Document everything. Build relationships based on mutual respect, not personal advantage. Never compromise your integrity for short-term gain. And remember that sustainable success comes from creating value for others, not from taking credit for other people's work. Most importantly, understand that your true worth isn't determined by whether one company recognizes it. If you're genuinely excellent at what you do, the entire industry will eventually know it. Patience and persistence always defeat arrogance and deception in the long run." Today, Michael Chen is one of the most successful independent consultants in the software industry. His firm employs over 40 people and has worked with Fortune 500 companies around the world. David Richardson works in sales for a mid-sized technology company in a different state, earning less than half of what he made at TechFlow. He's never again been offered a leadership position in the software industry. And whenever David's name comes up in professional circles, it's usually followed by the phrase, the guy from that conference presentation where the real developer exposed him. TechFlow Industries is remembered as a cautionary tale about the importance of recognizing and retaining technical talent. Business schools now use the TechFlow case study to teach students about intellectual property ethics, employee recognition, and the dangers of technical debt. And Michael Chen's conference presentation has become required viewing in several MBA programs as an example of how one person's integrity and expertise can ultimately triumph over corporate politics and stolen credit. But perhaps the most poetic justice in this entire story is that David Richardson's attempt to steal Michael's legacy ended up making Michael more famous and successful than he ever would have become if he had just stayed quietly in his cubicle. Sometimes the best revenge isn't just getting even. Sometimes the best revenge is becoming so successful that your enemies become irrelevant. So what can we learn from Michael Chen's masterpiece of professional revenge? First, document everything. Michael's meticulous record keeping was the foundation of his entire case. Without those timestamps, code repositories, and email trails, his story would have been just another case of said, she said. Second, never underestimate quiet competence. David Richardson made the fatal error of assuming that because Michael didn't play corporate politics, he didn't understand how power really works. But Michael understood something more important than politics. He understood how to create irreplaceable value. Third, patience makes revenge more powerful. Michael didn't lash out immediately after being fired. He took time to analyze the situation, gather evidence, and plan a response that would be devastating and completely legal. Fourthly, the truth has its own power. Michael didn't need to lie, cheat, or break laws to destroy his enemies. He just had to reveal the truth at exactly the right moment in exactly the right way. And finally, building genuine expertise and maintaining personal integrity will always triumph over stolen credit and political manipulation in the long run. David Richardson thought he was playing chess while Michael was playing checkers. But it turned out that Michael was playing 4D chess while David was still learning the rules of tic-tac-toe. This story proves that sometimes the best revenge isn't getting mad or getting even, it's getting so successful that your enemies become footnotes in your success story. What do you think? Was Michael's revenge justified? Should he have handled the situation differently? And have you ever dealt with someone who tried to steal credit for your work? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories of justice served and karma delivered. Because in the end, the truth always wins. It just sometimes takes a little help from someone who knows how to present it effectively. And if you're currently dealing with a toxic boss, credit-stealing colleague, or unfair workplace situation, remember Michael's example, document everything, build irreplaceable expertise, and never let anyone convince you that your contributions don't matter. Your moment of justice might be closer than you think,